You never truly know how much power you carry within until the world tries to break your spirit. We bring you the most inspiring tales of silent warriors who rose from the ashes of defeat to claim their victory. Subscribe today and find the fire inside your own heart.
Thanksgiving dinner at home, my mother said over the phone. The whole family. It's been too long. I was standing in the break room at school, still in my cardigan, with the marker stain on the sleeve that wouldn't wash out. I had 32 second graders waiting for me after lunch. I didn't have time to think twice about it. I'll be there, I said. I drove 4 hours from Columbus to my parents' house in Dayton, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The familiar exit, the familiar gas station on the corner, the familiar driveway with the cracked concrete my father had been meaning to fix since I was in middle school. I pulled in behind my brother's truck and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, telling myself this time would be different. It wasn't. The front door was unlocked. I walked in calling out a hello to nobody. The house smelled like it always did, that particular mix of my mother's lavender candles and something slightly stale underneath, like a room that doesn't get opened often enough. I set my bag down at the foot of the stairs and walked into the living room. My grandmother was sitting alone in the armchair by the window. The television was off. The room was quiet in a way that felt wrong for the day before a holiday. She was looking out at the front yard, her hands folded in her lap, and she didn't hear me come in. "Grandma," I said softly. She turned, and her whole face changed. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a while. "Claire," she said. "Oh, sweetheart. You came." The way she said it, "you came," like she hadn't been sure anyone would, settled somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I looked around. "Where is everyone?" She smiled, but it was the careful kind. The kind that holds something back. "There's a note on the kitchen counter. Your mother left it this morning. I found it next to the coffee maker." My mother's handwriting, neat and slanted, on a piece of paper torn from a notepad with little autumn leaves printed along the border. "Claire flew to Vegas with Dad and your brother for the long weekend. Last-minute deal, you know how it is. Grandma's medications are in the cabinet above the microwave. Her appointment Thursday is at 2 p.m. The address is on the fridge. Have a good holiday. Love, Mom." I read it twice. Then I set it back down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands want to do something else entirely. I stood there for a moment looking out the kitchen window at the backyard. The old oak tree my grandmother used to push me on a tire swing from when I was small. The garden beds, empty now and covered in a thin frost. I thought about the drive I had just made. The sub-plans I had written out for Friday. The leftovers I had eaten standing over my sink Tuesday night, so I wouldn't have to cook Wednesday before the drive. I thought about the last Thanksgiving before this one, when I had also driven 4 hours and sat at the end of the table while my brother talked about his promotion, and my parents nodded along and asked me if I was still doing the teaching thing. I went back to the living room. My grandmother was still in her chair. She was watching me with an expression I recognized. She was waiting to see how I would react, and she was bracing herself a little, in case it was bad. I sat down on the couch across from her and looked at her. Really looked. She was 81 years old. Her hair was white and fine, and she wore it pinned back the same way she always had. Her hands in her lap were thin, the knuckles a little swollen. She looked smaller than I remembered, the way people do, when you haven't seen them in too long. "So," I said, "I guess it's just us." She let out a breath. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't know until this morning." "Don't apologize," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. I meant it, and I meant something else too, something I didn't say out loud yet, that if it was going to be just the two of us, then maybe this was going to be the best Thanksgiving I'd had in years. I didn't know then how right I was. I didn't know a lot of things. I found a small turkey breast in the freezer and thawed it in cold water the way my grandmother showed me when I was 12. She sat at the kitchen table and talked me through her cornbread stuffing from memory while I wrote it down on the back of an envelope. We didn't have all the ingredients, so I drove to the grocery store, and she called me twice from the landline while I was in the produce section because she had remembered things she forgot to tell me. We ate at 5 o'clock at the kitchen table with the good cloth napkins she had ironed herself. She said grace in her quiet, certain voice. I had not heard anyone say grace over a meal I was sitting at in a long time. After dinner, I washed the dishes, and she dried them, and we talked. That is the simple version. The longer version is that we talked for 3 hours. About things I hadn't talked about with anyone in a while. She asked me about my classroom, and when I started answering, I couldn't stop the kids who were struggling to read, the ones who came in hungry, the little girl in the third row who had started bringing me a drawing every Monday morning. My grandmother listened the way she always had, completely, like there was nowhere else she needed to be. Around 8 o'clock, she told me she was tired, and I helped her to her room and made sure she had her evening medications laid out. Before I turned off the light, she reached out and took my hand. I'm glad you came, Claire, she said. I mean that. I am too, I said, and I meant it more than I had expected to. I slept in my old room that night. Same ceiling, same faint water stain in the corner that had been there since a leak in 2009. I lay there for a while thinking about the note on the counter, about my mother's handwriting, about the word deal, as in last-minute deal. I thought about how nobody had called to tell me. How the assumption was simply that I would show up and handle it, because I always showed up and handled it, and that required no conversation or acknowledgement. I fell asleep before I finished the thought. The next 4 days surprised me. I had brought work to do, a stack of assessment folders, and a book I had been trying to finish since September. I barely touched any of it. My grandmother and I fell into a routine that felt, somehow, like it had always been there waiting for us. She woke early, and I woke early with her. I made coffee and she made oatmeal, and we sat at the kitchen table in the morning quiet, before the neighborhood started moving. She told me things about her life I had never heard before. About meeting my grandfather at a church dance in 1964. About the year they nearly lost the hardware store they had built together, before it turned around. About raising 3 children, and what she wished she had done differently. I was too easy on your mother, she said one morning, not bitterly, just plainly, the way she said most things. She always wanted things to be comfortable. I never asked her to sit with anything hard. I think I did her a disservice. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just poured us both more coffee. On Friday afternoon, she asked if I would drive her to the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. I did. We stood at his headstone for a while, and she talked to him quietly, and I stood a few steps back and looked at the trees. On the drive home, she said, "He would have liked you, you know. The version of you now. He always said the best people are the ones who choose something that matters, over something that pays." I kept my eyes on the road. Teaching doesn't pay much, I said. No, she said. That's what I mean. Saturday night, after dinner, she asked me to bring her the wooden box from the top shelf of her bedroom closet. It was heavier than it looked, and old. The brass latch was tarnished, and the wood had a deep, dark finish that spoke of age. I set it on the kitchen table, and she opened it slowly. Inside were documents, old ones and newer ones, folded papers and envelopes and what looked like a ledger. She spread them out with careful hands and looked at them for a moment before she looked at me. I want to show you something, she said, because I don't think anyone has told you the truth about our family, and I think you are old enough, and I think you deserve to know. My grandfather had built the hardware store from nothing. That part I knew. What I didn't know was that in 1987, a regional home improvement chain had bought it, not forced him out, bought it, because it was successful enough that they wanted it. He had sold it for a sum that, at the time, was more money than most people in their neighborhood had ever seen. He had been careful with it, quietly, methodically careful, the way he was about everything. He had bought property. He had invested. He had never talked about it, because he didn't think money was something you talked about. When he died in 2019, he had left everything to my grandmother. She showed me the estate documents. She showed me the account statements. She was patient while I read, and she watched my face. I looked up at her. "Grandma," I said slowly, "this is a great deal of money," she said. "Yes. The total across the accounts, the property, the investments, it was just over $3.8 million. She had also inherited the house, which had been appraised the previous year at 400,000. The number sat in the kitchen between us, quiet and enormous. "My mother doesn't know?" I asked. My grandmother folded her hands on the table. "Your mother knows there was a sale. She knows there is money. She has never asked the exact amount because she is afraid asking would make her look greedy, and not asking lets her imagine it is more than it is." She paused. "Your uncle knows approximately. He has asked me, twice, whether I have updated my will." I thought about that. "Have you?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "Why do you think I'm showing you this tonight?" I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it was not simple. It was not clean excitement or gratitude or any one thing. It was complicated in a way that took me a while to understand. Part of me felt something warm and certain, like being told that someone had been watching, that it had been noticed, that the quiet choices had mattered to someone. But a larger part of me felt uneasy, almost guilty, because I knew what it would mean. I knew what would happen when other people found out. I knew what it would cost not me, but her. The peace of her last years. "Grandma," I said, "whatever you decide to do, it doesn't change anything for me. I want you to know that." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and her grip was still surprisingly strong. "I know," she said. "That's why." She had already spoken to her attorney. She told me this the next morning over coffee. She had made changes to her will 6 months earlier, and she had not told anyone, and she was telling me now because she thought I should have some time to sit with it before she was gone. She said that last part simply, without drama, the way she said hard things. She was leaving the house and the majority of her estate to me, with the specific instruction that a portion be used to establish a scholarship fund at the local high school in my grandfather's name for students pursuing careers in education or skilled trades. She was leaving my mother, my uncle, and my aunt, each $150,000, which she said was more than enough to be meaningful and less than enough to change who they were. "Your mother will be angry," she said. "I know," I said. "She will say I was manipulated, that you took advantage of an old woman." "I know. You didn't," she said firmly. "I want that said plainly, between us, so you have it. You showed up. You made dinner with what was in the freezer. You drove me to see your grandfather. Nobody manipulated anyone. I have been making my own decisions for 81 years, and I am not about to stop." I drove home to Columbus on Sunday afternoon. The 4 hours felt different going back. I had the radio off for the first part of it, just the sound of the highway, thinking. My boyfriend Daniel was in the kitchen when I got home, making pasta. He looked up and said, "How was it?" with the particular caution of someone who has learned that "how was it" can mean many different things, depending on the answer. I set my bag down and sat at the kitchen counter. "It was good," I said. "It was really good." He looked at me for a moment. "Something happened." "Something happened," I agreed. I told him. He listened the way he always does, without interrupting, without offering immediate opinions, just listening until I was finished. Then he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I feel like I need to go back and see her more," I said. "That's the main thing I feel." I went back 3 weekends in December. I drove up on Saturday mornings and drove home Sunday nights. We watched old movies, and I helped her with her Christmas cards, and we cooked together, and she taught me to play gin rummy properly, which she said I had been playing wrong my whole life. I brought my grading and did it at her kitchen table while she read. It was quiet and good. On December 23rd, she had a small stroke. She was in the hospital by the time I got the call. I drove up that night. My mother flew in from wherever she had been. My uncle drove down from Michigan. I sat in the hospital waiting room and watched my family assemble around a crisis the way families do, with urgency and fear, and, underneath it all, the other thing, the thing nobody names out loud. She was stable within 12 hours. She recovered most of her function, though her left hand was a little weaker than before. The doctor said she could go home before Christmas with a care plan. Everyone agreed this was a relief. My mother pulled me into the hallway on Christmas Eve. She had the look she gets when she is about to say something she has been composing for a while. "I think," she said carefully, "that we should talk about getting Grandma some professional help." Full-time care. Maybe. Or looking into communities that are designed for. She doesn't want to leave her house, I said. Claire. She had a stroke. She had a minor stroke, and she recovered well, and she has a care plan, and her doctor is monitoring her. She has told me very clearly that she wants to stay in her home. My mother looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Something assessing. You've been spending a lot of time up here, she said. Since Thanksgiving. Yes, I said. May I ask why? I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I thought about the note on the counter with the autumn leaf border. I thought about my grandmother's hands around mine at the kitchen table, her grip certain and strong. Because she's my grandmother, I said, and I like being with her. My mother had nothing to say to that. Or she had many things and chose none of them. My grandmother came home on Christmas Day. I was there when she walked in, and she looked around her house slowly, at her armchair and her curtains and the photographs on the wall, and she let out a long breath like something loosening. Good, she said. Good. She lived another 14 months. I was with her for most of the good ones, and some of the hard ones. She declined gradually, then quickly, the way it tends to go. I was with her on the last night, sitting beside her bed, her hand in mine, the house quiet around us. She died in February, on a Thursday morning, with frost on the windows, and pale winter light coming through the curtains she had hung herself decades ago. The attorney contacted the family 2 weeks later. I will not describe the meeting in full, because some of it was ugly in ways I don't want to dwell on. My mother did say that I had manipulated an elderly woman. My uncle asked whether the will could be contested. The attorney explained, calmly and clearly, that the document had been prepared and signed 18 months before my grandmother's death, at a time when she was in full cognitive health, and that it had been witnessed and notarized, and was entirely sound. My mother did not speak to me for 4 months. She called in June. It was a Sunday evening. I was on my back porch with a glass of iced tea, and Daniel was inside starting dinner, and the light was the long, golden kind that June evenings have. I looked at her name on the screen for a moment before I answered. She did not apologize. Exactly. She said she had been thinking. She said she understood that I had been there when she wasn't, and that she supposed that mattered. It was not the conversation I had once imagined we would have. But it was real, and it was hers to give, and I took it. We are not close in the way I used to want us to be. I don't think we will be. Some distances are built over too many years to close entirely. But we talk, and we are careful with each other, and that is something. The scholarship fund was established in my grandfather's name in the fall. The first awards went out to 3 students, 2 going into teaching, 1 into welding. I went to the small ceremony at the high school. They each said a few words. One of the teaching students, a young woman of 19, with a serious face and a firm handshake, said that she hadn't thought she could afford college until she got the letter. I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table, spreading out those papers, looking at me steadily. I want to show you something. I don't think anyone has told you the truth. I thought about a tire swing on an oak tree, a cemetery in November, cornbread stuffing from memory, told to me out loud while I wrote on the back of an envelope. I still have that envelope. It's in my kitchen drawer, a little soft at the folds from being handled. I come across it sometimes when I'm looking for something else. I don't put it away.